Somewhere in America right now, a locomotive built before your grandparents met is dragging 100 loaded freight cars through the night, and it's not in a museum. While billion-dollar modern engines sit dead in the shop waiting for a computer to be rebooted, machines from the 1950s are still clocking in, still pulling, still refusing to quit. These are the diesels that were built when reliable meant something. Here are 10 of them that simply won't die. Number 10. EMD SD7. We start with a pioneer. The EMD SD7, built between 1951 and 1953, was the very first locomotive in Electromotive's legendary SD line. SD standing for Special Duty. The idea was simple but revolutionary. Take a road switcher and put it on 6 powered axles instead of 4. More axles meant the weight was spread out, which meant the machine could crawl over the light, rickety branch line track that 4-axle units would pound to pieces, and it could put more of its 1,500 horsepower down onto the rail without spinning its wheels. Under the hood sat EMD's 16-cylinder 567B engine. And that engine is the secret to this entire video. So remember the number 567. It was a 2-stroke V16 designed to be torn down and rebuilt over and over, practically forever. Cylinders came in individual power assemblies that a crew could swap out one at a time without pulling the whole engine. That's why these things don't die. You don't replace them, you renew them, piece by piece, decade after decade. Only a few hundred SD7s were ever built, which makes the survivors genuinely rare. But rare doesn't mean retired. A number of them were later upgraded and rebuilt into what became known as SD7 and SD9 hybrids, and a handful still turn wheels today on industrial railroads and short lines where their slow-speed lugging ability is exactly what the job calls for. Think about that. The engineers who drew up the SD7 were working with slide rules in an era when television was still black and white, and their machine is still shoving loaded hoppers around a yard while the fancy new units next door are tethered to diagnostic software. The SD7 kicks off our list, not because it's the toughest, it's near the bottom because so few survive, but because it started a bloodline of 6-axle workhorses that would go on to dominate American railroading for the rest of the century. Every heavy hauler that came after owes something to this quiet 1951 experiment. Number 9. Baldwin S12. Number 9 is the underdog, the locomotive built by a company that lost the war but earned a reputation that outlived it. The Baldwin Locomotive Works had spent a century building some of the most magnificent steam locomotives ever to ride the rails. But when the diesel age arrived, Baldwin struggled. Their switcher, the S12, was built from 1951 to 1956, and 451 of them rolled out of the Eddystone, Pennsylvania plant before Baldwin threw in the towel and left the locomotive business for good in 1956. Here's the twist. Railroad men loved them. The S12 used a turbocharged 6-cylinder version of Baldwin's powerful 606A engine. And Baldwin diesels were famous for one thing above all else: lugging power. When you hooked a Baldwin onto a dead-heavy cut of cars that refused to move, the engine would dig in and simply pull, low and relentless, where other locomotives would slip and stall. Old-timers used to say a Baldwin would pull until the couplers broke before it gave up. They were also, to be honest, temperamental. Baldwin's electrical systems were fussy. Parts became scarce the moment the company folded, and the mainline railroads traded most of them in within a couple of decades. And yet, that stubborn strength kept them alive exactly where brute pulling matters more than speed or subtlety. Heavy industry, steel mills, chemical plants, and gritty industrial railroads clung to their Baldwins for decades. Because when your entire job is dragging impossibly heavy loads a few hundred feet at a time, today most surviving S12s live in museums, but a scattering hung on in industrial service far longer than anyone expected. And a few restored examples still fire up and go to work. The fact that a locomotive from a bankrupt manufacturer, one that couldn't even keep its own factory open past 1956, is still capable of outlugging modern power in the right setting tells you everything about how these things were built. Baldwin lost the business, but the machines won. Number 8. EMD F7. Number 8 is the most beautiful locomotive on this entire list and one of the toughest. The EMD F7, built from 1949 to 1953, is that classic streamlined bulldog nose cab unit you picture when you imagine the golden age of American railroading. Nearly 3,850 of them were built, and at the time, it became the best-selling diesel locomotive in history, a record it held until EMD's own SD42 finally beat it decades later. The F7 alone outsold every locomotive every other manufacturer built, combined. That is total market domination. Beneath that gorgeous stainless and steel body was, you guessed it, a 16-cylinder EMD 567 engine, this time making 1,500 horsepower. The F7 was designed to gallop across the country at the head of both freight and passenger trains, and it was so economical to run and so easy to maintain that railroads simply refused to give them up. Hundreds stayed in regular freight service through the 1970s, and some clung on into the 1980s and even the 1990s on short lines and in industrial settings long after they were supposedly obsolete. There's a wonderful, almost unbelievable detail from the history of these machines. An F7 built in 1949 was still working freight in local service across the US-Mexico border decades later, shoving cars back and forth across an international boundary in the brutal southern heat, doing a job nobody thought to give it a fancier machine for. It just kept showing up. The F7 does have one honest weakness that knocked it down the list. The crews hated switching with it. That long nose made it nearly impossible to see hand signals, and it was awkward to climb in and out of, which is why the road switchers we'll meet higher up eventually pushed it aside. But for pure line haul muscle and reliability, it was untouchable. Today, dozens are preserved, with several still fully operational on tourist railroads and at museums, restored, running, and occasionally still hauling. 70+ years on, that bulldog nose still turns heads and still turns wheels. Number 7. EMD SW9 and SW1200 switches. Number 7 isn't a glamorous mainline racer. It's the humble yard switcher, and it might just be the most quietly indestructible machine in the whole diesel era. We're grouping two closely related EMD switches here, the SW9, built from 1950 to 1953, and its successor, the SW1200, built from 1954 all the way to 1966. Both were compact, end-cab switches packing around 1,200 horsepower from, say it with me, the EMD 567 engine. These little machines were built for one purpose: shoving freight cars around yards and industrial sidings, coupling and uncoupling, sorting trains car by car. It's unglamorous, endless, punishing work, constant starting and stopping, constant strain, all day, every day. And the SW series ate it up. There's an old rule of thumb among short-line operators, from the tiny SW1 all the way up to the SW1500, you basically cannot go wrong with an EMD switcher. Here's why they survive in such numbers, and it's a genuinely clever bit of industrial history. Locomotives standardized its components across its entire product line. That means a part of a scrapped F unit or GP unit could keep a switcher alive. When one of these locomotives finally wears out, it doesn't get thrown away. It becomes an organ donor for the ones still working. That enormous, deep pool of interchangeable, still available parts is exactly what makes them so appealing to short lines and industries with tight budgets. Less repair strain, less downtime, low cost, and a machine that just keeps running. That's the reason you can still walk into a working rail yard, a factory complex, or a grain terminal today and find a switcher from the early 1950s doing precisely the job it was built for 70 years ago with no plans to retire. A modern switcher would do the same job, but it would cost several times as much, and when it breaks, you're waiting on a technician and a proprietary computer. The old SW just needs a wrench and a spare power assembly. For the operator counting every dollar, the 1950s machine genuinely works harder because it works cheaper and it almost never stops. Number 6. ALCO RS3. At number 6, we meet the great rival to EMD, the American locomotive company, universally known as ALCO. For decades, ALCO had been EMD's biggest competitor, and the RS3, built from 1950 to 1956, was one of its most important machines. More than 1,000 of them were built, and the RS3 was a true road switcher. A versatile, do-everything locomotive rated at 1,600 horsepower that could pull a freight, haul a passenger train, or switch a yard, all in the same day. The RS3 rode on ALCO's own 244 diesel engine. And here's where the story gets interesting and honest. ALCO engines were powerful, and they pulled beautifully, but they had a reputation for being harder on their owners than the bulletproof EMD 567. ALCO itself stopped building locomotives entirely in 1969. So how on earth are RS3s still working today? The answer is one of the great tricks of railroad survival: the repower. Faced with cranky original engines and a manufacturer that no longer existed, owners and rebuilders took RS3s, stripped out the temperamental ALCO power plant, and dropped in a reliable EMD engine instead. The rebuilt machines, often called RS3M, the M for modified, got a whole new lease on life. They kept ALCO's rugged frame and running gear and married it to EMD's legendary reliability, best of both worlds, and it worked. As of just a few years ago, rebuilt RS3s were still earning their living on short lines and as industrial switchers, decades after the company that designed them had ceased to exist. There's a locomotive on the Housatonic Railroad in Connecticut, for instance, that was bought second-hand from Conrail back in the 1980s and kept right on working. Others shuffle passengers at museums or shove cars in yards. Think about the resilience on display here. The builder went out of business over half a century ago. The original engine was replaced, and still the machine soldiers on, because the bones ALCO built were so good that people kept finding ways to keep them alive. That's not survival by luck, that's survival by sheer engineering stubbornness. Number 5. EMD SD9. Halfway home, and now we bring out the heavy artillery. The EMD SD9, built from 1954 to 1959, was the machine that took our number 10 pioneer, the SD7, and perfected it. This was the second model in EMD's 6-axle special duty line, and it corrected the SD7's rough edges with a crucial upgrade: the improved, far more maintainable 567C engine, still 16 cylinders, now making 1,750 horsepower. Picture the SD9 as a stretched, muscled-up cousin of the GP9 we'll meet at the very top of this list. Same reliable heart, but riding on 6 powered axles instead of 4. That configuration is the whole point. 6 axles means tremendous traction and the ability to spread heavy weight over track that couldn't take a concentrated load. For heavy, slow grinding work, pulling long drags of loaded cars up a grade, hauling ore, moving serious tonnage on marginal rail, the SD9 was in its element. The big railroads that first bought them mostly moved on by the 1970s and 1980s, as bigger, more powerful units arrived. But that's not the end of the SD9 story. It's the beginning of its second career. Cast off by the majors, SD9s were snapped up by short lines and industrial operators who needed exactly what the SD9 offered: brute, reliable, low-speed pulling power at a bargain price. Many were rebuilt and modernized, and to this day you can find SD9s, both in their original tall hood form and rebuilt low hood versions, still hard at work. And here's the thing that fits our whole theme perfectly. A lot of the jobs an SD9 does today are jobs where a brand new 4,400 horsepower locomotive would be almost comically overpowered and wildly expensive to buy and run. If your railroad's whole task is moving heavy cars slowly and steadily over a few miles of light track, a rebuilt SD9 from the 1950s doesn't just do the job, it does it more sensibly, more cheaply, and more reliably than the modern alternative. It outworks the new machine on the only scorecard the owner cares about: getting the freight moved without going broke. Number 4. ALCO S2 and S4 switchers. Number 4 brings ALCO back, but this time with the machine that built the company's entire reputation. The ALCO S-series switchers, the S2 built through 1950, and its near twin, the S4 built from 1950 all the way to 1961, were the small, squat 1,000 horsepower switchers that seemed to be everywhere in mid-century America. Over 1,500 of the S2 alone were built, and the whole S-series ran into the thousands. These little machines were powered by Alco's 539 engine, and if the RS3 higher up had a reputation for being cranky, the S-series had the opposite reputation for one specific, glorious quality. They could pull. Railroaders talk about these squat little switches the way you'd talk about a stubborn mule. Small, temperamental, belching black exhaust, but able to shove the longest, heaviest cut of cars in the yard with what looked like minimal effort. That legendary Alco lugging ability, combined with a short wheelbase that could snake through the tightest industrial curves, made the S-series the perfect tool for exactly the kind of work nobody wants to buy a brand new locomotive for. And that's precisely why they've had such an astonishing afterlife. As freight cars grew bigger and heavier through the 1960s, the big railroads cast off their little Alco switches, and short lines and industries scooped them up. Then, when those owners were done, the S-series found yet a third life, especially at grain elevators and heavy industries where you just need to nudge a few cars for loading and unloading. That's no job for a shiny new engine. It's a job for a tough, cheap second-hand switcher that starts every time. They survived in lease fleets, coast to coast, well into the 21st century. Even today, of the couple of dozen S2s known to survive, several are still in genuine regular service. A handful of 1940s and 1950s Alco switchers still turning wheels for a living. One S2 built for the South Buffalo Railway back in 1941 is still going strong on a New York short line. Built when your great-grandparents were young, still clocking in. Number 3. EMD GP7. Now we're into the top 3. And number 3 is the machine that changed everything. The EMD GP7, built from 1949 to 1954, was Electromotive's first true road switcher. And it is not an exaggeration to say it reshaped the American railroad. More than 2,700 of them were built, and its arrival marked the moment railroads gave up on beautiful, impractical, streamlined cab units in favor of something plain, boxy, and endlessly useful. GP stands for General Purpose, and that name was the whole pitch. A GP7 could do road freight in the morning, switch a yard in the afternoon, run a branch line, pull a commuter train, and haul a passenger run, any assignment you threw at it. It made 1,500 horsepower from a 16-cylinder EMD 567 engine, and it was so redundant, so flexible, and so utterly dependable that it made railroads fall in love with the humble road switcher forever. It also happened to be far safer for crews who could actually see what they were doing in both directions, the exact problem that plagued the pretty F7 units. This was the machine that finally let the last holdouts of the steam era retire their iron horses for good. And because so many were built, and because that 567 engine is so eternally rebuildable, the GP7 became a permanent fixture of the short-line world. They're considered cheap to operate, easy to maintain, and blessed with parts that are still readily available. Many were heavily rebuilt over the years, buying them even longer lives. But here's my favorite fact on this entire list. There is a GP7 Aberdeen and Rockfish number 205, built in 1951, that holds a remarkable distinction. It's recognized as the last GP7 continuously operated by its original owner, and it was never even rebuilt. Think about that. A locomotive delivered new in 1951 that stayed on the roster of the same railroad and kept working decade after decade on its original bones, not restored, not preserved, just used faithfully for the better part of a century. If you want a single machine that proves the point of this video, it's that one. Number 2. British Rail Class 08. For number 2, we cross the Atlantic. Because the single most jaw-dropping example of a 1950s locomotive still working hard isn't in America at all. It's in Britain, and it's called the Class 08. Built by British Railways from 1953 to 1962, the Class 08 is a small 060 diesel-electric shunter, Britain's word for a switcher, and it is the most numerous class of locomotive in the entire history of British Railways. A staggering 996 of them were built. It's powered by an English Electric 6KT engine of around 350 horsepower, and it has a wonderfully old-fashioned feature. Instead of driving the wheels directly, it uses side-connecting rods, like a steam locomotive, which gives it a charming half-steam, half-diesel look, and its famous rumbling idle that British rail fans lovingly call the Gronk. Now here is the part that genuinely defies belief. It is 2026 as this is written, more than 70 years after the first Class 08 was built, and the Class 08 is still in active mainline service on Britain's national rail network. Not preserved, not in a museum, working. They're operated right now by Network Rail itself, by DB Cargo, by GB Rail Freight, by Freightliner, by Direct Rail Services, and by countless smaller operators and industrial sites. Somewhere around 100 of them are still earning a living, with dozens more preserved on heritage lines, where the class is so common that most preserved railways just use one as their everyday works shunter. Why? The same reasons as everything else on this list, distilled to their purest form: engineering simplicity and robust construction. That English electric engine is easy to maintain and economical to run. There's no raising steam, no warm-up, no computer to boot. You just start it and it's ready to work. It was designed for the modernization drive that swept away Britain's steam shunters in the 1950s, and it did that job so well that 7 decades later, nobody has found a compelling enough reason to replace all of them. A locomotive designed under rationing before man went to space is still shunting the wagons of a modern 21st century railway. There is no better proof anywhere on Earth that they built these things to last. Number 1. EMD GP9. And so we arrive at number 1. The definitive survivor, the king of the workhorses, the machine that more than any other embodies this entire idea. The EMD GP9, built from 1954 to 1963. If the GP7 at number 3 invented the modern road switcher, the GP9 perfected it. It took everything that made the GP7 great and improved it. More power, now 1,750 horsepower from an upgraded, even more reliable 16-cylinder 567C engine, and better reliability across the board. And railroads bought it in absolutely staggering numbers. When you count American and Canadian production together, roughly 4,250 GP9s were built. It outsold even its hugely successful predecessor. Steam holdouts like the Norfolk and Western bought whole fleets of them to finally permanently banish the steam locomotive from their railroads for good. But sales figures aren't why the GP9 tops this list. It tops the list because of what it's still doing. The GP9 is, without much argument, the classic surviving American workhorse. Hundreds of them, in heavily rebuilt form, are still in service today across the continent, with short-line railroads and industrial operators. And it's not just the little guys. As recently as 2022, the mighty Canadian National, one of the biggest railroads in all of North America, still had a fleet of rebuilt GP9 RM units working as switchers. A Class 1 giant, running billion-dollar modern locomotives across a continent, still leaning on machines designed in the 1950s to get the everyday work done. That's the whole story of this video, in one image. Because those GP9s aren't sentimental keepsakes. They earn their place. They're cheap. They're tough. Their parts are everywhere. And that 567 engine can be rebuilt practically forever. For the daily grind of switching cars and working the yard, a modern locomotive is expensive overkill. A computer on wheels that costs a fortune and sulks when a sensor fails. The 1950s GP9 just starts and works, and starts again tomorrow, exactly as it has for 70 years. They don't make them like this anymore. And the strangest, most wonderful part is that they don't have to. Because the ones they made in the 1950s are still out there, still pulling, still refusing to quit. Long after the machines that were supposed to replace them have come and gone, these old diesels keep on working. Harder, smarter, and cheaper than anything newer parked beside them. Which of these old warriors surprised you most? Have you seen one of these still working near you? Drop it in the comments. I read them all. If this ran on a good, reliable engine for you, hit that like button and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Until then, keep 'em rolling.